My name is Marissa Cole. I am 37 years old, and last Christmas Eve, my sister-in-law poured wine down my dress while my family laughed in silence. For years, I paid every mortgage, every bill more than $75,000, yet my name was erased from the deed and from their will. When I uncovered the truth about my mother's stolen charity funds and my sister-in-law's affair with my brother's business partner, I stopped being their silence. By New Year's, their secrets destroyed them, not me. The moment I stepped into my parents' house in Raleigh on Christmas Eve, the smell of cinnamon candles and roasted turkey hit me like a wall. Every corner sparkled with gold ribbons and polished ornaments, and voices of cousins and church friends floated through the living room. For a second, I let myself believe this year might be different. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed the navy dress I had chosen carefully, and walked toward the dining room where everyone was gathering. The sound of laughter rose just as I reached for a chair near the side table. Lydia, my brother's wife, appeared with a glass of red wine in her hand, her diamond earrings catching the light. She leaned close enough that I felt her perfume, then tipped her wrist. A stream of wine splashed across my dress, soaking the fabric running down my legs. Gasps filled the room, followed by a few chuckles. Lydia pressed a hand to her mouth in mock surprise. "Oh my," she said loudly enough for everyone around to hear. "Looks like that suits you better anyway." My father Richard glanced away, pretending to fuss with the sound system. My mother Evelyn rearranged a centerpiece that didn't need fixing. My brother Daniel looked at me, then looked down at his plate. Not a word came from him. I stood frozen, the liquid seeping cold against my skin, my face burning. Every eye that turned toward me carried the same expression, a mix of pity and satisfaction. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to keep my chin up, to not let Lydia see the sting behind my eyes. Without a word, I excused myself and walked toward the kitchen heels, clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Inside, the hum of the refrigerator and the rattle of pots grounded me. I grabbed a handful of paper towels and pressed them against the stain, watching the deep red spread wider. My hands trembled not just from the chill of the wine, but from the humiliation of standing alone in front of my family while they watched in silence. I could hear the laughter still echoing from the living room. Lydia's voice rose above the others, smooth and calculated, as if nothing had happened. I pressed harder against the fabric, whispering to myself to stay calm, to not let the tears fall here, not in their house. A kitchen staff member hired for the night passed by, carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. She gave me a quick, sympathetic glance, then lowered her eyes and moved on. Even strangers could see what my own family chose to ignore. I leaned against the counter, staring at the marble surface, feeling the weight of years pressing down. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't clumsiness. Lydia had wanted to mark me, to show everyone that I was less, that I didn't belong at their shining table. And the worst part wasn't her smirk. It was the silence that followed the silence of those who were supposed to protect me. I folded the damp towels into the sink, rinsed my hands, and stood there for a long moment. My reflection in the dark kitchen window showed a woman, older, sharper, not the daughter who once believed she could earn her place here by paying every bill and never asking for thanks. The stain on my dress was stubborn, and I knew it would not come out tonight. I brushed my hair back, lifted my chin, and walked back toward the hallway. The voices grew louder again, the music from the old stereo mixed with the clinking of glasses. I paused in the doorway, watching the scene. Lydia laughed at something Daniel whispered. Evelyn adjusted her pearl necklace. Richard filled another guest's drink. Not one of them looked toward me. I returned to my chair near the kitchen, a wrinkled seat cover draped over it far from the center table where the family gathered. I sat down, my dress still damp, the cold seeping in, but my expression remained calm. Inside, though, something shifted. For the first time, I stopped wishing for their acceptance. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. What Lydia did wasn't just a petty insult. It was a message loud and clear that I was an outsider in my own bloodline. And as I sat there listening to their laughter without me, a quiet certainty settled into my chest. This night was not the end of my story with them. It was the beginning of something else entirely. I sat in the corner of the room, the chatter of relatives floating around me as if I were invisible. The damp stain on my dress clung to me, sticky and cold. But it wasn't the wine that burned it, was the silence that followed. I opened my phone under the table, scrolling through my bank app. The list of auto payments lined up neatly, every mortgage installment, every utility, every insurance premium, all withdrawn from my account like clockwork for the last 4 years. More than $75,000 had drained out of my pocket into this house, the same house where I was treated like a stranger tonight. I tapped one of the transactions, and the confirmation appeared, my name clearly listed as the sole payer. My chest tightened as I scrolled back further, remembering the nights I stayed late at the office to cover those bills. Not once had anyone thanked me. Not once had my name been on the deed. I could still hear my mother Evelyn's voice from a year ago when I had asked about the paperwork. She had smiled, her hand brushing mine like she was soothing a child. "Marissa dear, you will be taken care of. It will all be divided fairly when the time comes." I had wanted to believe her. Tonight I knew better. Across the room, Emily, my youngest sister, laughed with a group of cousins, her voice high and carefree. At 29, she had never paid a bill in her life. My parents adored her, spoiled her with weekend trips, paid off her car, celebrated her every minor success. Daniel, my brother, sat beside Lydia at the main table, the proud son, the center of attention. I watched my father clap his shoulder, pride etched in his face, as if Daniel had built the life I had actually been sustaining in silence. My phone buzzed with another monthly confirmation. $1,560 deducted from my account just yesterday. I stared at the number until it blurred. I thought of the vacations I never took, the furniture I never bought, the savings account that never grew because I was too busy covering for people who refused to see me. I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my clutch. The weight of it felt heavier than it should. My stomach churned as Evelyn walked past my corner, her pearls glinting under the chandelier. She didn't even look at me, only whispered to a neighbor about the catering, her tone sweet and polished. To her, I was not a daughter tonight, only a presence to be endured. I sipped water from the wrinkled glass in front of me and forced myself to breathe evenly. The realization was sharp and cruel. I was nothing more than the family's ATM. They had turned me into a machine, dependable and silent, expected to keep running without recognition. Every sacrifice I made had been erased by their indifference. The band started playing carols, and voices rose as glasses clinked. My eyes stayed fixed on the stain on my dress, a dark reminder of what Lydia had done, of what the family had allowed. My jaw tightened, and in the quiet corners of my mind, a new thought began to form. If they saw me only as a resource, then I would stop being their resource. If they believed I could be humiliated into silence, they had no idea what silence I was capable of giving them. I folded the napkin on my lap with careful precision and set it aside. The night was not over, but something inside me had already shifted. They could laugh, they could toast, they could pretend I wasn't in the room. I was already planning the moment when their comfort would collapse without the support they never acknowledged. And as I watched Lydia raise her glass with that smug smile, I promised myself that by the time the year turned, she and everyone who had stood by her would understand exactly what it felt like to be erased. I slipped outside into the cold night air, the voices and laughter muffled by the heavy back door. The yard glittered with string lights wrapped around bare oak trees, their branches swaying lightly in the December wind. I hugged my arms against the chill, needing space to breathe. That was when I heard my cousin Tammy's voice, low and careful. She had followed me out, her coat pulled tight, her eyes darting toward the windows to make sure no one saw. She leaned closer, her words barely above a whisper. "Marissa, I need to tell you something. The charity accounts your mother runs, the numbers don't look right." I frowned. Tammy worked at a regional bank in Durham. She knew how to read between lines. She shook her head. "I can't give you files, but the transfers, they don't match the reports. I thought you should know." Her warning struck like a match in dry grass. I felt heat rush to my face. My mother had built her reputation in Raleigh's church circles on that charity, standing at pulpits, thanking donors, smiling for photographs. If Tammy was right, Evelyn's good name was a facade. Before I could answer, Tammy squeezed my hand and slipped back inside, leaving me with the wind and my pounding heart. A moment later, my phone buzzed in my clutch. A message from David Parker, my friend from college, who now worked as a financial attorney in Charlotte. He had seen my posts over the years about paying bills for my parents. His text was blunt. "Every account is under your name. If you want to stop the payments, you can. Legally, they have no right to demand your money." I stared at the screen, my breath clouding in the dark. For years I had told myself I was trapped, that cutting them off would make me heartless. But the truth was simpler. I had been giving them control that never belonged to them. I opened my banking app, my thumb hovering over the screen. The list of autopays stared back at me, each one a chain I had forged myself. I tapped the mortgage payment, pressed cancel. A confirmation box popped up, my name glowing on the screen. My chest tightened, but I clicked yes. I did the same for the utilities and the insurance. With each confirmation email that hit my inbox, I felt lighter, stronger, steadier. The yard was quiet, only the faint hum of the party inside drifting through the glass. I slipped the phone back into my clutch, my fingers no longer shaking. For the first time in years, I had taken something back. The kitchen door creaked open, and Lydia's laugh floated into the night. She was telling some story, her words dripping with charm. I stepped further into the shadows, watching her silhouette pass by the window, her glass raised high. My jaw clenched. They had no idea the ground beneath them was already shifting. I turned toward the street, letting the cold air clear my mind. Tammy's warning and David's message weren't coincidences. They were pieces of something larger, a pattern that was beginning to reveal itself. If Evelyn's charity was a lie, if Lydia's mask was slipping, then there were more secrets waiting. I walked back inside, weaving past relatives who barely glanced my way, and returned to my seat near the kitchen. My dress was still stained, my body still cold, but inside me, a fire had caught. I wasn't powerless anymore. I lifted my glass of water and took a long sip, my eyes fixed on Lydia across the room. She smiled at another guest, unaware that I had already pulled the first thread. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, I knew I wouldn't have to wait long before the rest of their carefully woven fabric began to unravel. On the morning of December 26th, I sat at my small kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. My laptop screen glowed in front of me, the IRS website opened, the public filings for Evelyn's beloved charity loaded. I scrolled slowly, comparing line after line against the receipts stacked beside me, receipts with my own name on them. At first the numbers blurred together, but then one entry caught my eye. A transfer for $15,000 labeled as a program expense, but the routing led to an account that didn't match the charity's official bank. My stomach twisted as I typed it into a search. The account holder was Lydia Grant. I leaned back, pressing a hand against my chest. My mother's spotless reputation at the church, all the speeches about serving the community, all of it had been built on lies. And Lydia was helping herself to the donations, padding her lifestyle with money that was never hers. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of the filings, each page captured, time-stamped, undeniable. That afternoon I drove to Monroe Supplies, the small family business Daniel claimed to manage. I wanted to look him in the eye to see if he knew. The office was quiet, only the faint buzz of a copy machine filling the space. Daniel wasn't there, but his phone lit up on his desk as I passed by. A message flashed across the screen before fading. "Meet me at the Marriott at 7. Same suite. Bring the keycard." It was from Lydia. I froze, the phone glowing like a beacon. Before the screen darkened again, I pulled mine from my pocket and snapped a quick photo. The sender's name was undeniable, the message too intimate to explain away. Cole Maddox. I remembered him from a fundraiser last year. Slick suit, easy smile, the kind of man who always seemed to stand too close. My chest tightened with the ugly realization. Lydia wasn't just stealing from the charity. She was sleeping with Daniel's business partner. I stood in that office, the hum of the copy machine suddenly deafening my pulse in my ears. The pieces began to slide into place. My parents' blind adoration of Lydia, her cruelty toward me, her carefully polished image. It was all armor to protect the secrets she thought no one would ever see. The front door opened, and Daniel walked in, juggling a folder and his coffee. He smiled, faintly distracted, then blinked when he saw me. Marissa, what are you doing here? I forced my voice steady. Just checking in, needed to ask about some invoices. He shrugged, set his things down and started leafing through papers, completely unaware that his wife's betrayal sat in plain view on his desk moments earlier. I murmured a quick excuse and slipped out before my face could give me away. Back in my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, the photo of Lydia's message glowing on my phone. 2 discoveries in one day: charity fraud and an affair with Cole Maddox. Both tied to Lydia, both enough to shatter the perfect image my family worshipped. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly. It wasn't time yet. Not tonight. But I would keep every shred of evidence. I would guard it until the right moment. And when that moment came, none of them would see it coming. The sun was setting as I pulled out of the parking lot, the sky streaked with red. I glanced at the photo again, the words sharp and undeniable, and I knew this was only the beginning. Something darker was waiting beneath the surface, and I was going to find it. On the evening of December 28th, I sat on the last pew of St. Mark's Church while the choir rehearsed a soft hymn in the background. The sanctuary smelled of polished wood and incense, and the lights cast a golden glow on the pulpit. Pastor Harris stood in front of the congregation, his voice carrying pride as he praised my mother Evelyn for her tireless devotion to the community. He called her the beating heart of the charity, a woman of integrity who had given more than anyone else. Applause filled the room. I kept my head bowed, my hands tight around the folder in my lap. Inside was a printed copy of the Form 990 I had pulled 2 days earlier. The numbers did not lie. My mother was stealing from the very cause she was being honored for. I looked at her standing near the altar, pearls, gleaming lips curled into a modest smile, and I felt the burn of betrayal rise again. The congregation clapped louder, and all I could think about was how the truth sat quietly in my hands, while a lie glowed at the center of the room. I slipped the papers back into my bag before anyone could notice my pulse hammering as Evelyn glanced toward the pews. Her eyes skimmed right past me, as if I were just another face in the crowd. That night, I drove to my parents' house. The colonial brick home looked calm under the winter sky, the wreath on the front door still bright with red ribbon. I parked at the curb, my headlights off, and walked up the path. The side door code was the same as always. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and furniture polish. I moved quietly through the hallway, every creak of the wooden floor making my heart race. In the study, the desk lamp was still glowing. Papers lay scattered across the mahogany surface. I scanned them quickly until my eyes froze on a manila folder stamped with the name of a law office in Raleigh. My hands shook as I pulled out the document inside. It was a scanned copy of my parents' will. The names listed were clear: Daniel Cole, Emily Cole. My own name was gone. I read the lines again, hoping I was mistaken, but the words cut deep. The estate, the shares in the business, even the lake house that my father loved, all divided between my brother and sister. I had been erased not just from their hearts, but from their legacy. I felt something crack inside me as I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of every page. My breaths came shallow and uneven, but I kept steady, sliding each sheet back exactly as I found it. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hall, every second echoing like a drumbeat. My phone buzzed softly in my hand. It was David. I sent the photos over without hesitation. Within minutes, he replied, "This looks valid but questionable. We need to confirm with the county clerk. If they made changes without notifying you, it can be contested." I leaned against the desk, the cold wood grounding me. I thought about Emily laughing with cousins at the Christmas party, her life carefree. I thought about Daniel smiling beside Lydia, his pride inflated by a business propped up with my sacrifices. And now my own parents had written me out entirely, as if my existence were nothing but an afterthought. I turned off the lamp, slid the folder back into place, and stood in the shadows of the study. The weight of what I carried now was immense. Charity fraud and a stolen inheritance. 2 secrets capable of tearing apart the spotless image my family had polished for decades. As I stepped back into the hallway, I caught sight of a framed Christmas photo hanging on the wall. My parents, Daniel, Emily, and Lydia, stood smiling in coordinated outfits. My spot in that picture had never existed. My chest tightened, but instead of breaking me, it steeled me. I walked out into the freezing night, the photo secure on my phone, David's message still glowing on the screen. My breath rose in white clouds as I pulled my coat tighter. I had proof now, proof strong enough to topple them. What I didn't know yet was that the cracks in their perfect facade were about to widen, and soon the lies they thought they buried would start slipping through the surface for everyone to see. On the afternoon of December 29th, I walked into the Monroe Supplies office with a folder tucked under my arm and a storm building in my chest. Daniel sat at his desk, sleeves rolled up, tapping at a calculator as if numbers could shield him. He looked up with a smile that faded quickly when he saw my expression. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "Do you know that Lydia has been siphoning money from Mom's charity accounts?" Daniel's eyes flickered, then he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "That's ridiculous. You don't understand how the paperwork works." I stepped forward, laying my folder on his desk with a quiet thud. "I have the filings, Dan. Transfers into an account tied to her. This isn't a mistake." His jaw tightened. "You always think you know better. Lydia has been the only one holding this family together, and you're twisting things to make her look bad." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. An email had arrived from an anonymous sender. I opened it, and the subject line made my stomach flip. "Monroe contract copy." I tapped it, and a PDF filled the screen. It was a supplier agreement complete with Lydia's signature and another from Cole Maddox. I scrolled through, my pulse racing. The purchase orders listed didn't exist, entire invoices fabricated. I hit print on Daniel's office machine, the pages sliding out in a neat stack. I held them up against another legitimate contract from the company's files. The formatting was almost perfect, but the PO numbers didn't match anything in the system. I laid both sheets side by side in front of Daniel. The signatures were identical too. Identical. "This is fraud," I said quietly. "And if it comes to light, it won't just be Lydia's name on the line." Daniel's face reddened. He slammed his hand on the desk, the coffee mug rattling. "Stop trying to destroy my marriage. You've always been jealous. You think you can walk in here with a few papers and tear down everything I've built. What you've built," I thought bitterly, "was propped up by my money and Lydia's lies." I studied his eyes as he avoided mine, his anger a thin veil for fear. He knew. Maybe not the full extent, but enough to feel the ground shifting under his feet. I gathered the papers calmly, sliding them back into my folder. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to convince him. The truth was already on the page, and denial would not erase it. As I walked toward the door, Daniel called after me, his voice breaking. "If you do this, Marissa, you'll tear this family apart." I paused with my hand on the handle, the weight of his words pressing against me. They had torn it apart long before I lifted a finger. I stepped out into the cold evening, the sky streaked with fading light, and clutched the folder tight against me. Each page felt like another knot in the rope tightening around them. They had thought I would always be silent, that my loyalty would outweigh the truth. But the truth had claws, and it was already digging in. I started the car, my reflection in the rearview mirror pale but unflinching. In less than 2 days, the family's grand New Year's Eve celebration would bring everyone together. And when that night came, the lies Daniel was trying so hard to protect would be impossible to hide. The lobby of the Westmont Hotel glowed with chandeliers as guests in black tie attire streamed into the ballroom. I walked through the revolving doors with my head high, the folder in my bag pressing against my side like a heartbeat. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with gold drapes and crystal glasses. A live band played softly, while waiters floated between tables carrying champagne flutes. My family held court at the front, exactly where they always believed they belonged. My father, Richard, raised his glass as he stood, cheeks flushed with wine. He welcomed the crowd, thanked the church, and praised the Cole name as if it were a crown no one could take. My mother, Evelyn, sat beside him in silver satin, her smile practiced and flawless. Daniel lingered near Lydia, his shoulders stiff, his eyes avoiding mine. And Lydia, draped in emerald silk, looked every bit the star of the evening, her laughter cutting across the room like glass. When Richard finished his toast, applause swelled. Lydia stepped forward to add her own words speaking about family values, loyalty, and the bright future of Monroe Supplies. The hypocrisy in her voice nearly made me laugh. My chest tightened, but my steps were steady as I pushed back my chair. The room quieted as I walked to the front. I could feel their eyes on me, some confused, some curious, others amused. I reached the stage and asked the technician for the screen. My voice didn't tremble. "Please play these." The first image appeared. A phone screen captured clearly Lydia's message to Cole Maddox arranging their meeting at the Marriott. Whispers rippled across the tables. Gasps followed when the next slide showed financial transfers from Evelyn's charity into Lydia's side account. My mother's hand flew to her pearls color, draining from her face. I stepped closer, holding up the printed contracts. These purchase orders were fabricated. Lydia signed them with Cole Maddox. Every invoice is false. The numbers match nothing in the company's records. The guests leaned forward, their murmurs rising into a wave of shock. Pastor Harris rose slowly from his seat, his lips pressed thin, his eyes burning with betrayal. He turned away from Evelyn and walked toward the exit, without a word. I clicked to the final slide. A scanned will dated only months ago. My name was missing, erased. The estate divided neatly between Daniel and Emily. My voice stayed calm. Even family was not safe from their lies. The room froze, heavy silence pressing down. Lydia's face twisted, her voice shrill. "Lies, all of it." She spun toward the crowd, arms flailing. "She's making this up to ruin me." The ballroom doors opened, and a figure stepped inside. Cole Maddox, tall in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. He walked forward slowly, ignoring Lydia's frantic stare. His voice carried over the crowd. "It's true. Every word. Every contract. Every message." Lydia shook her head, mascara streaking down her face. "You're obsessed, you're lying." Cole's gaze stayed fixed. "You told me it was only business. You used me to drain your own family and betray your husband." He turned to Daniel. "She played you, Daniel. She never intended to stand by you." The crowd broke into hushed voices, some guests pushing their chairs back, others shaking their heads. The air crackled with disbelief and condemnation. My father sat rigid, his hand clenched on his glass, unable to look at me. Evelyn kept her eyes on the tablecloth, as if hiding could undo what everyone had seen. Daniel stared at Lydia, his face pale, his body trembling. For once, he had no words. I stepped back, letting the silence grow, letting the truth settle over them, like a storm they could no longer escape. The night they thought would crown them with glory had stripped them bare. The band had fallen silent, the chandeliers glittered above like indifferent witnesses, and I knew this was only the beginning of their fall. What waited after tonight would be far worse than humiliation. It would be consequence. On the morning of January 1st, Raleigh was quiet under a pale winter sky. My phone buzzed with notifications I hadn't expected to see so soon. A statement from the church announced that Evelyn Cole's position on the charity board was suspended pending review. Donations had been frozen until further notice. The local paper ran an article that quoted Pastor Harris, his words heavy with disappointment. "Integrity is the cornerstone of service. Without it, there is nothing." By noon, news spread further. The state had acknowledged an inquiry into irregularities in the charity's tax filings, the same filings I had copied days earlier. I pictured my mother reading that headline, her pearls clenched in her fist, realizing her name would never carry the same weight in Raleigh again. A call came from Melissa, my friend in PR. She had heard that Monroe Supplies was being audited after several partners raised concerns about fraudulent contracts. One supplier had already canceled their agreement, and others were demanding reviews. The family business that had once been my father's pride was crumbling under the pressure. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window of my apartment. The city streets were empty, most people still recovering from the night before. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from David. He had filed the documents contesting the new will. He assured me there was a case. I had been deliberately excluded, and the courts would see through the manipulation. Later that afternoon, I heard from Tammy. She told me quietly that Daniel had been spotted leaving the courthouse, with a stack of papers, divorce filings. He had chosen the only path left once the betrayal was undeniable. Emily, my younger sister, hadn't been seen in days. Her social media was silent. Friends said she was too embarrassed to show up at the church or anywhere in town. As for Lydia, news traveled fast. The State Bar Association had opened an investigation into her ethics as a corporate attorney. Her name was circulating not in the society pages, but in professional forums filled with speculation about suspension. She had wanted to be admired, envied, untouchable. Now she was infamous. And my father, once so proud, had retreated from his circle of friends. Men he played golf with, men he bragged to about his son and his perfect daughter-in-law, now turned their backs. His phone calls went unanswered. He was left with the bitter taste of humiliation, something he had never endured before. I sat in my apartment, the hum of the heater filling the silence. The folder of evidence lay on my coffee table, no longer heavy, but strangely light, its purpose fulfilled. I thought back to the moment in the kitchen on Christmas Eve, wine dripping down my dress, while laughter echoed around me. They believed I would always be silent, that I would endure quietly, as I had for years. They were wrong. I didn't ruin them. I simply stopped protecting them. The truth was already written in their lies, and when I let it out, it destroyed them more completely than anything I could have invented. I leaned back against the couch, closed my eyes, and let the quiet fill me. For the first time in years, it wasn't the silence of exclusion. It was the silence of freedom. Tell me if the people who humiliated you in front of everyone carried secrets capable of ending everything they built. Would you keep their lies buried? Or would you let the truth speak for itself?